Welcome everybody to our internet-based Behdini Beginners course. In this course we'll be working through 3 textbooks, the blue book, the Behdini Conversations in Storytelling Student Book A, and then the red one, that's the B one, that's full of the appendices with the bilingual vocabulary strip. Behdini Beginners textbook that I used to use. This is not all of the Kurdish language learning materials that I have, but this is what we're teaching in this course. So today we're going to work on the just an introduction. First of all, there are 2 dialects that I'll be working with in this video session. Some of you, Katie and Colin, you guys are studying the Zaho dialect, and some of you are studying the Dahuki dialect. They're very, very similar. My natural inclination is to speak with the Zaholi dialect because that's where I learned Kurdish, was in Zaho. But I have since learned the Dahuki dialect. Somewhat. My husband Dave, when we got married 4 years ago, was not getting Kurdish as well as I wanted to see him get it. And when you're 52 years old and you start language learning for the first time, it's more challenging than when you're 28, obviously, like I was when I started learning Kurdish. So I thought, how could I make this easier? And so this book that we're working through today is how I made it easier for him, and it's been a very doable thing for him. If you will open your blue book A and look at the table of contents, you'll see what I have highlighted here. And this is the lesson 1 that we're going to be working through. It's very basic, and right away from the beginning you'll see the differences between the Zaho and the Dahuki dialects, and that's totally okay. So just bear with me whenever we have differences like that. Just a reminder, if you flip through a couple more pages, you'll see this notes on the Behdini Conversations and Storytelling books. As I said, it's a 3-book set for Kurdish language instruction for teenagers and adults. I have it in these 2 dialects. I also have it in the Shingali Kurdish dialect. So if you need it in the Shingali Kurdish dialect, contact me later, and I can get you in touch with some other people that are teaching that. For the Zaho and the Dahuki dialects, we have these 3. So book A is the student's book that teaches the basics. Many of these things are audio recorded. Book B is the interactive appendices, grammar charts. And then book C is the grammar-based workbook. Now, on the next page, you'll see this. It says prerequisites and recommendations. And this is essential. If you have not already done this, please follow all the instructions on this page and do this work, because this is foundational work for what I'm teaching today. Obviously, if you haven't had a chance to do it yet, that's totally fine. But you'll want to do this starting tomorrow so that before I teach the next lesson, you'll have already been familiar with these things and have started working on them. So the main thing is, number 1, the transparent language online Behdini activities. Now this is very, very helpful, because if you download this app and you work on it on your computer, that'll work better than if you work on it on a smartphone, but smartphones do work too. This is all in the Zaho dialect. The audio recordings are in the Zaho dialect, but that doesn't matter if you're learning the Dahuk dialect, because the pronunciation is almost exactly the same. This will really help you understand the alphabet, the writing system, and some of the basic vocabulary. Then you can, for your first thing, you can start with the alphabet and Unit 1, Lesson 1 of that lesson. If you would like the printed vocabulary cards that go with it, you can download them from this URL and print them yourself. If you would like me to print them for you in Dahuk, They usually cost about $25 when they're all printed. I can get them printed for you. Just let me know and I can order them if you would like. And then number 2, it's really essential that you have a language helper. If you are going to try to learn Kurdish by yourself without a language helper, you will not have very good success. If you're in the States and you need a language helper, I have friends in Virginia that are from Zaho that would be glad to give you some Skype language lessons. If you're in Dahuk and you don't have a language helper yet, talk to some of the other people there and find out who they've been using. Maybe they have some recommendations and they could help you. One note about your language helper, he or she may or may not actually like this book because it's written conversation. And when Kurds see Kurdish that's written and it's in the Latin script, they don't like that very well because they usually write in the Kurdish script. And then when they see grammar explanations, they don't oftentimes like my grammar explanations because they've never studied Kurdish grammar like this. But it really works well for Westerners. So the whole point of working with the language helper is to go through the conversation part and the vocabulary part, and then you work on the grammar part at home and then run your sentences and stories by your language helper and see if they're correct. We'll talk about that more later. Number 3, if you are really serious in your language learning, you'll want to get my Behdini complete curriculum. You can order it there in Dahuk for about $205, and it's this set. If you would like to see more, you can go to Amazon and type in my maiden name and see a full description of it. So if you type in Cherie Rempel Behdini Complete, you will get this course up, and then you can click on that and you can read the full description of these materials there. Right here, you can click on read more and read all about it. Not going to do that today, but obviously it's cheaper if you buy it directly from me too, so do that. All right, and then finally, number 4, you want to do the Get Started lessons. And the link is above for the audio recordings. If you have not done this already, this will be really helpful to you because it'll help you understand how to pronounce the letters and things like that. And again, the Get Started lessons are in the Zahoui dialect, but don't let that hinder you if you're working on the Dahuki dialect because it'll be really helpful for you. All right, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and unmute your mic and ask at this time. Otherwise, I'm going to just jump into the lesson. Some of you may wonder.
Cherie.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, where do we get the audio part for the Get Started lessons?
Oh,
Is that on?
it's actually on page 1, lesson 1, right here.
Okay.
This gives you your link to the audio recordings right there.
And so they're online. Sorry, I didn't have
Those are online, and they look like this for the Zaho, where I don't know, it looks like when you download it, but it looks like this. So then you would go to like lesson 1 and listen to it. In the Dahuki, it looks like this. Let me make this bigger so you can see it. So it ends up looking like this. So you can see it's the Dahuk audio recordings, and this is the lesson 1 folder. So here's how you read it. L1 stands for lesson 1. Sec A stands for section A, and then part 1 or part 2. So then you'll know which one you're going to be studying. So for example, I got to get to my book.
So can we listen to whichever one we want to focus on, the Behdini or the Zakoui, Do you have everything in Zacco in Behdini, or?
Yes, the answer is yes. And if you have the Dehookie book that you bought from Bree, then you'll need to listen to the Dehookie audio recordings.
Okay.
If you want to buy the Zaho dialect book, you can order that and use that book, and then you would use the Zaho dialect audio recordings. The Zaho dialect audio recordings are not complete. They stop after, I don't know, lesson 6 or 7, something like that. The Dahook audio recordings are complete. And these audio recordings have been done primarily by native speakers. So they're really, really helpful. Yeah. Okay, that was a great question. Anybody else have a question? Some of you may wonder, how do I speak Kurdish? Let me just give you a brief history. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see what I look like, actually. Get back to my Skype. My mouse isn't working very good, sorry. So I first learned Kurdish when I lived in Zaho, 1992 to 1993. I lived with a Kurdish family, and that was my full-time job, was learning the language. I have a master's in teaching English as a foreign language, so I took that training and those skills in teaching English, and I applied it to myself to learn Kurdish because I had very few resources. And I learned the Zaho dialect because that's where I was living. And I worked on my complete Behdini curriculum for about 10 years to get that to the point that it is in now. And then, like I said, when Dave and I got married 4 years ago, I worked on these conversations and storytelling books. And I've been working on those for 3 or 4 years. So it's a nice way to learn Kurdish. It's a whole lot easier than just doing the GPA. GPA is a great way to do it, or barefoot language learning. That's a great way to learn language, but these books will help you with lists of vocabulary and with pre-recorded audio recordings, and the grammar structure is right there for you. So even for people that prefer the GPA or barefoot language learning, I think you'll find that doing some grammar studies is also very helpful. And the nice thing about a book is you can pick it up and put it down whenever you want to. All right, I'm going to go back to the lesson and see how that works out for us. Bree, do you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to look right at lesson 1. It's on page 1. So if you have a book, you want to get the book in front of you. And basically what I'm going to do in these lessons is just read through it. I'm going to introduce to you how to use the book. It is my goal to teach you how to use the book. It is not my goal to teach you Kurdish. That's what your language helper is for. So this little symbol over here points to an activity which you can do with your language helper after class. So a lot of these have this little box right in the margin, and that's what you're gonna use afterwards with your language helper. Also, there's Kurdish script writing here. That's not for you. That's for your language helper. In case your language helper doesn't read the Latin script or doesn't read English, that will give your language helper some instructions to know what to work on with you when you work on that later. The first thing we're going to do is this part 1, and it's the names and direct case pronouns. Okay, so let's look at that. So I'll say it, and then with your mic off, just say it after me. Az, tu, al, Heen. Some people in Dahuk say hoon, ow. We also have the names of all these little characters, and we'll get to that on the next page. On page 3 it is, you have the alphabet. And this is audio recorded. Please listen to this with your audio recording. The thing that you're going to want to notice is that there are some special Kurdish characters that we don't have in English. So like this one, the C with the little hook, that says ch. And there's some others. So I'll just go through them all. I'll go straight down the list, starting with A, and we'll go all through. I'm not going to tell you the name of the letter. I'm going to tell you the sound of the letter. So you can listen to the sound and repeat it, and then you can do a lot of practice with the Transparent Language app. Okay, here we go. Just listen and repeat each sound. A, B, J, Ch, D, A, G, E, I, J, K, O, O, N, O, Q, R, R, S, Sh, T, U, U, V, W, V, Y, Z, A. Okay, I know that was really fast. So we're going to go through the hard ones. And again, you can practice with the audio recordings, the Get Started lesson, the Behdini Transparent Language app. You can do that. Also, this chart shows you how to write, well, what the Kurdish script looks like, so that there's a whole section in the Behdini complete curriculum in book B, that shows you how to write in the Kurdish script. I didn't learn to write in the Kurdish script until I had been speaking Kurdish for about 15 months. Actually, I didn't really learn it for about 5 years. So it's very possible to just work in the Latin script if your main focus is conversation. However, if you want to learn to read like the scriptures or anything else like that, you're going to need to learn how to at least read Kurdish script, which is easier than writing Kurdish script. So I would encourage you at this time not to focus on Kurdish script, but just to maybe recognize it, learn a few letters here and there. And if you want that lesson, you can get it from book B of my complete curriculum. All right, now the only thing tricky about some of these letters is the ones that we don't have. So, that's always B. The letter C makes the J sound. Now, I would also encourage you not to try to write these sounds in anything other than Arabic or Kurdish script. Unless you know another language that's very phonetic, I wouldn't try to write it in English, because it doesn't work very well in English, because English isn't very phonetic. Kurdish is very phonetic, and usually what you see is what you get. And if you try to write these sounds in anything other than Kurdish, it'll just be a crutch for you, and it won't be very helpful. So again, this sound is J, J. The next one is ch, ch, d, Now the letter E by itself does change from time to time. Sometimes it's sometimes it's eh. Eh. The E with a hat on it is A. A. Then you have G. Now the H with two dots. If you know any cats, if you don't have any cats, go borrow a cat. You can go see ours in Zawita. When they fight with each other, they hiss at each other, and this is exactly the sound that they're making. So there's no friction in your throat. You simply close your throat, open your mouth, and then force air outside of your mouth. So just pretend you're a cat hissing at another cat. Then the I with a dot is not written in the Kurdish script, as you see from the lack of letters here. It's only ever written as when it comes at the beginning of a word. It has the sound of I, I, I. An I with a hat is E, E, E. The letter J has the Z, Z sound. I think I pronounced it wrong when I went through it the first time. Z. It's like, think of it as French. Z. The letter K is K, K. Then U, U. And in the Latin script, we do not note velarization as they do in the Kurdish script. You'll just have to listen to your language helpers. What is velarization? Velarization is when a sound has a really big, fat sound and kind of dark and deep. So this L that is velarized, my mouse isn't working very well, but that little V that's over the Kurdish script L, that indicates velarization. That is like the L in the English word well. That is a velarized L. It's kind of a dark L. Ooh, ooh, like that. Mm. Mm. The letter O is a bit of a chameleon. In the Zaho dialect, it's rarely pronounced O. It's usually pronounced oo. In the Dahuk dialect, it's very frequently pronounced oo and sometimes pronounced O. So the O is a bit of a chameleon, and you'll just listen to your language helpers and learn how they pronounce things. Now the spellings that I've used in my books are based on the Kurdish script standard spellings that are found in many, many Kurdish writings, including the Bible. If you find that your language helper consistently says a word that would be spelled differently from the way that I write it, that's probably a word that you just need to memorize the sound of, the pronunciation of, but still continue to write it the way that I write it in the curriculum, because that's standard spelling. Obviously, languages change, so if you find that you're reading the Bible, the scriptures, or another well-published author, and you find a consistent spelling difference, let me know. Send me your source, and I can make changes. Okay, the P, P. Now the Q. Q's we do not have in English that have this sound. The Q is like a K, but it's farther down in your throat. So put your finger on your soft spot that would be right below your Adam's apple if you had an Adam's apple. There's a little soft spot right there, and that's where the Q sound starts. Qa, 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 qa. It's not a G, g. It's not a K, k. It's a Q, qa, qa. And this is a sound you'll need to practice with your language helper in person. The single R is called a flap. And that's where your tongue touches the roof of your mouth one time. Ara, ara, ara. Now, the easiest way to learn this is if you're American and you know the words butter, utter, clutter. These words have the flap R in the middle of their sound. So say the word butter, butter, like butter, you know, the stuff you put on your toast. Butter, butter. That inside sound is the R flap. Butter, butter. I know we spell it with T's in English, but it's actually a flapped R. Now, if you want to make the trilled R, you just take the flapped R and you do it several times. And the way to practice this is by taking the word butter and then removing the B and removing the R. Let me show you on this. Here we go. So you take butter and you remove the B and then you remove the R at the end. Okay, so now you have ara, ara. This double T in English has the flapped R sound. And if you just do it a lot, that'll give you the trilled R. Ara, 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 ara. When I was learning German many years ago, I couldn't figure out how to pronounce the German R, and it was driving me crazy. So I asked my language teacher, how do you pronounce it? And she explained the theory to me, like I've just explained to you how to pronounce this. And then I practiced it every single day for 10 minutes as I walked to school and for 10 minutes as I walked home. And that helped me to learn the sound. So if you understand the theory behind how a sound is made, you can train your tongue and your throat, the muscles in your tongue and your throat, to make this sound. When we're born, we're born with the ability to make any sound in anybody's alphabet. But because, you know, we don't have those sounds in other people's alphabets, we don't learn them. So then we get to learn them as adults. But we have the ability, we just have to practice it. So practice these hard sounds with your language helper, in person with your language helper. Look at their mouths, their throat, their tongue, and try to do that. And also work with the Transparent Language app. That's really helpful. Now the plain S is just like a simple S. And then the S with a hook on it has the sh sound. T has the t sound. The U and the U with a hat in the Zacho dialect and usually in the Dahuk dialect have very little differences. They are basically pronounced oo, oo. Now, if you learn Sorani, that's a whole different ball of wax, and the U with a hat on it is very strongly pronounced in Sorani differently than we do it in the Behdini dialects. The V sound is the American V sound, V, V. The W is the American W sound, W, W. The X, all right, this is where all the boys love this sound. You kind of have to spit. So it's sort of like gargling. If you know German, it's the CH sound in German. So yeah, you kind of have to spit, and don't be shy. Just go ahead and get it out. There you go. And then the X with two dots on it is made exactly the same way, the same location in your throat, but you put you put voicing with it instead. And if you know German, it's the R, similar to the R in German. So it's like spitting, but it's got voicing. It's not a very common letter, but you do need to learn it. Okay, the Y in the Latin script is a Y, and it's exactly the same in the Kurdish script as the I with a hat. The difference is that the I with a hat, oops, has the little movement mark at the beginning that a Y in the initial position doesn't have. That's why I like teaching in the Latin script, because it's more descriptive than the Kurdish script. You don't have to guess. Is it a Y or is it an I with a hat? So the Y has the y sound. The Z has the Z sound, Z. And then the apostrophe, it's actually a letter. It's the apostrophe, and it has the Ain. So if you know Arabic, it's the Ain. And if you don't know Arabic, you can just think about English when we say uh-oh, uh-oh. This space right here is where the Ain happens naturally in English. Uh-oh, uh-oh. It's like you're slightly strangling the O. Your throat is constricted a little bit. Like that. Sort of like the vowel has constipation or something. Now, if you want to practice this little bit of conversation here, again, you'll get all of this on your audio recordings. You would say, Ip harfet kurdi bu min bin visa. Ip harfet kurdi bu min bin visa. And that means write it in Kurdish script for me. So if you're working with a language helper, and for example, you're asking the names of all the members of the family of your language helper, and you're writing them down for writing practice, then if you're not understanding something because you're not saying it correctly, ask them to write it for you in Kurdish script. And then maybe you can find those letters, and then you can figure out which Latin script letter goes in that place. All right, let's go ahead to the next page, page 4. Up at the top it says B. Let's see if I can move you guys here. Okay, so B, conversation and role play. And this is the crux of each lesson. Obviously, lesson 1, it's very simple. You probably all already know, Navita Chia. But I'm going to teach you why you say Navita Chia and why you answer the way that you do. So again, just a reminder, when you see this little mark in the margin, that means this is something for you to practice with your language helper. All right, so listen and repeat the conversation. Naveta Chia. And then in the next part, you put your name in. Now, how are you going to know which of the verbs to use? We have 2 verbs. One is one is ya. So look at your footnotes. All the footnotes in this book are there for your education. Please read them all and pay attention to them, because it makes the description in the lesson itself a lot shorter if I put them in footnotes. So footnote 1 says, when a word ends in I with a dot, such as the word ch, and it is followed by a Y, such as in the word ya, the Y causes the I to sound like an I with a hat. So in essence, it sounds like chi ya. This is also true for words that end in an E and are followed by a Y. The Y causes the E to have the long E sound, A in this case. It's just a thing that happens in language. But when you write the word what, you're going to write ch with an I with a dot, not with a hat. And then number 2, if your name ends in a consonant, like my Kurdish name is Shireen. My name ends in a consonant, then I'm going to end the sentence with a. If your name ends in a vowel, like Bree, I don't know if that's what they call you, Bree, but there, it ends in a vowel. If your name ends in a vowel, you're going to use the ya ending. This is explained more in section F of this lesson. If it's awkward to say your Western name and end the sentence with a or ya, just drop the a or ya. This is the verb is, and Western names don't always work very well, so sometimes they would just say, for example, Navemin Cherie or Navemin Scott instead of saying Scott. If they don't understand and they start calling you Scotta all the time, then when you introduce yourself, don't put the verb on. Mine Navemin Scott. And then they'll understand what your name actually is and drop the sound at the end. Now, let's practice with the names of the characters in the book. So, Bayar. So, I'm going to say, what is your name? And then I'm going to answer, my name is Bayar, for example. Okay? And this is something you can do with your language helper, with the other people in your family or that you live with. You can practice these names. Okay? Naveta Chia. Now you say it. Navemin Bayara. Bayara. Naveta Chia. Navemin Gulzara. Gulzara. Naveta Chia. Navemin Bahara. Navemin Bahara. Naveta Chia. Navemin Havina. Navemin Havina. Okay, now I'm just going to go through and pronounce the names. Please repeat after me. Daoud, Shireen, Khaloud, Juwan, Shivan, Nergiz, Sami, Ali, Nizar, Fatima, Zana. And then in part 2, we have a whole conversation. Chawani, Navemin Shirina, Navetachia. And just as a reminder, I'm stopping so that you can repeat after me. Navemin Gulzara. And then how do you say, it's nice to meet you? You say, Pei Hush Halam. Pei Hush Halam. And then when you answer it, to say, nice to meet you too, you say, Aji Pei Hush Halam. Aji Pei Hush Halam. Now, I do have one mistake on the transparent language activity, and that is that it is incorrectly written with an X instead of an H with 2 dots. So you can correct that when you get there. And some of you may be wondering, what is pay? What does pay mean? Pay is a contraction. We'll get to this later. Pay means ipta, with you. Okay, so there's a conversation that you can practice with somebody else. Now let's work on part 3. In the Zaho and Dahuk dialects, because of the influence of Arabic over the last 50, however many, 70 years since Iraq was created by the British and put together with the Arabs, a lot of Arabic words have come to be very common in the Zaho and Dahuk Kurdish dialects, because for many, many years, until 1991, the school children had Arabic as their main language of education. And then in 1991, when President George H.W. Bush established the no-fly zone and prevented the Kurds from getting hurt by Saddam Hussein, the Kurds took it upon themselves to establish their own semi-autonomous government, which is now called the Kurdish Regional Government, the KRG, or whatever the acronym is now. And the educators took it upon themselves to switch the kids' education from Arabic to Kurdish. And at first they switched them to Sorani, which is a foreign language. So here kids were going to school first to learn Arabic, which is a foreign language, and then to learn Sorani, which is a foreign language. And then shortly after 1991, they switched them one grade at a time, starting with kindergarten in first grade, to learn Behdini as the main language of education. And then every year they would add another year of Behdini language learning. So for years and years, the kids would eventually have Behdini, like in the elementary school years, and then they would get to junior high and high school, and suddenly they would have to switch to Sorani because they didn't have any Behdini curriculum. And then they would get to university and they would have to switch to English or Arabic. So the generation that grew up in the 90s and the 2000s had a lot of challenges linguistically. I think it's a little easier for the kids now, except with COVID, because they have so much all through K through 12 that's in Behdini. But still, when they get to university, it's either English or Arabic that they study because universities are not equipped with Behdini language textbooks so much. So it's a bit of a challenge, but because of all the Arabic influence over the years, a lot of Arabic words are part of the Kurdish language now. And so we have things like nice to meet you that are modified Arabic. So you could say Chawani Bashi, Basham, I'm fine. And then if you're going to introduce someone, you could say Ava Dawuda. And then if you want to say it's nice to meet you, you would say Ahlan wa Sahlan. That's Arabic. It's not Kurdish, but most of the Kurds say it. Ahlan wa Sahlan. If they say Pei Khush Halam, it's because their teachers are more educated, but the everyday street people, I think, they all say Ahlan wa Sahlan, and everybody in Zaho says Ahlan wa Sahlan. They don't say Pei Khush Halam. And then how do you say nice to meet you too? It's the same thing. Ahlan wa Sahlan. On the next page, you have the spelling and pronunciation. And again, you need to work with your audio recordings on this, so I'm not going to go through these at this time. I'm just going to point out a few things to you. One thing is this word ava. When I was learning Kurdish, I didn't have a dictionary, of course, because nobody had written one in the Zaho dialect or the Dahuk dialect. We only had Kurdish from Turkey, which is a whole different set of vocabulary than we do in the Iraq area. So I walked around with my language helper, or the lady that I lived with, Khulud. I walked around the house and I would point to something and I would say, Avachia, what is this? And she would answer me. And everything that she answered me had an at the end. She would say, Ava diwara, Ava kalama, Ava waraka, Ava glasa. Everything had an at the end. And I didn't know if she was Italian or what was going on. Later, I realized that the at the end was the verb is. So, ava chia. That's the question for what is it, or what is this? And then she would say, ava qalama, for example. It is a pen. So this sound was what I was hearing all the time, and I finally realized that that was the verb and not actually a part of the word itself. And I didn't understand why she always said ava. And that we'll get to it later. That's actually called the specific reference marker. That's complicated. For right now, just go with the flow that it is the same thing as of. It's just got this little at the end of it, and it means this. Now, the word mamnoon, you'll notice in the footnotes, is an Arabic origin word, and it is not pronounced as typical Kurdish Latin script spelling would show you. Instead, it's pronounced like with the ah sound, mamnoon. And we don't have that ah sound in Behdini. When you have j in front of another word, the j is a preposition that means from, but when you say it, you're going to say shta. You're not going to say jita. So this is where written Kurdish can be a bit of a trip up for you, and where you really want to listen to how people say things so that you don't sound like a book when you talk. Shta is how it's pronounced. And that's pretty consistent anytime that j gets used in front of another word, it's pronounced sh. The bi is also a preposition, and in the Zaho dialect, almost always and frequently in the Tehuki dialect, it is not pronounced b. It's pronounced like a p instead. P. So avachia kurdi. So it's oftentimes the sounds like, hey, or ip, ip. So avachia ip kurdi, avachia kurdi, and you hardly hear it at all. It's just barely a p there, avachia kurdi. But if you don't put it there, it sounds wrong. And if you ask your Kurdish friend to say it slowly, they might say, if they're looking at your book, they might say avachia b kurdi. But if you listen to them talk to each other, they're not going to say b for the most part. Most of them are going to say p or ip. Now also, here we have a difference in the Zaho and Tehuki dialects. And it's this ya that comes after ava when you have an adjective that follows it. We're going to get to the description of that later. Zaho doesn't do it, Tehuk does. Another example of using b is right here in the greeting. So when you want to say goodbye, again, you don't say b khatrata. Usually you say just a p. Close your mouth and make the p sound, pkhatrata, pkhatrawa. And again, that's where you need to listen to the audio recordings and to your language helper. Part 2, you can play tic-tac-toe with a partner. And the way you do that is one of you says one of the words, and then you put your X. So I'm going to say, And then if I'm going to play with Bree, she's going to do something smart like mamnoon, mamnoon. And then I'm going to play and I'm going to say zidak tarin, zidak tarin. And then she'll say something, mustard, mustard. So you say the word and then you put your mark and see who wins the game. Practice that on your own or with your language helper, please. Now we have the whole vocabulary list. And again, I'm not going to go through this. I'm just going to point out some things to you and let you work with the audio recordings, which are recorded by native speakers in your Zaho or Tehuki dialect. I told you that the U and the O sometimes have slightly different pronunciations. Like sur. S-O-R-R for red. Sur. It's not sor. It has more of the U sound. Sur. Sur. In the beginning, when you're learning language, you need to listen, listen, listen. Listen to your language helper pronounce things. Listen to those audio recordings over and over and over again, because the more you listen, the more your ears get tuned and you can hear better, and then you can pronounce things better. Now, there are some words that when they're written in Kurdish, I don't know why, but they write them really crazy. Like bachik or bachuk. Almost everybody says bachik, but if you'll notice, Dehukis write in the Kurdish script, they'll write two vowels, a U and an I with a hat. Instead of saying bachik, they'll add a U in there. And I don't know why they do that, but it's very standard. So I have chosen not to write it the standard way and instead to write it conversationally. So when you are reading it in the Kurdish script and you see bachuik, you're gonna be like, oh, that's one of those things Sheree was talking about. So that's what I'm talking about. Your verb, in Zacho, it's going to be bin biba. To hook, it's bun biba. We'll get to that later. You want to learn things, you know, how to say sipas, zor sipas, or galak mamnoon. Thank you very much. So you can be polite. Now, there's the ongoing question between expats. Can you say Zor Mamnoon or Galak Supas? Or can you only say Galak Mamnoon and Zor Supas? So you guys can do a survey and come up with your own answer. Most of my Kurdish friends either say Galak Mamnoon or Zor Supas. On the next page, we're on page 7. You have more of these phrases. You have your question words. You want to learn these question words. This will help you as you're listening to people to know how to pronounce, not only how to pronounce your words, but how to ask questions. It's really important to ask questions. Now you're saying, what's up with this direct case business? We'll get to that more in the next lesson, but just know there are two cases. There's a direct case and an oblique case. And if you've never studied another language before, you may not know what a case is because we don't have them in English. But for example, in German, there are 4 cases. Or, you know, if you really want to be cool, go to Estonia because they have 13 cases. So Kurdish, we have 2 cases. It's very doable. Anytime in my curriculum that I have like a word that's underlined in parentheses and it looks English, that's because it is, and that's like something you're supposed to substitute there and make some substitutions of other words. So instead of saying book chia Kurdi, you can say pen chia Kurdi, or blanket chia Kurdi, or box chia Kurdi. And if you're working with a language helper that knows some English, then they can help you answer that question so you can learn those new words quickly instead of, you know, the hard way. These language learner phrases here on the left will be helpful for you as you work with a language helper so that you can use as much Kurdish as possible so that you are not using English with your language helper. Now, one of the things that is so easy to do in the beginning, when you start working with a language helper who knows a little bit of English, is to just default to English all the time. But force yourself to use some Kurdish. So you can say, Ava yadrista, Ava na yadrista, or in the Dahuki dialect, in the Zaho dialect. Let me get that up for you. Avadrista, Avanadrista. So work with your language helper. If you want to say it again, then say it in Kurdish. Jorek di beja. Jorek di beja. Or in the Zaho dialect, Jorek di beja. Jorek di beja. If you want to say it slowly, then say hedi beja. Don't say in English, say it slowly. Say it in Kurdish. Hedi beja. So learn these language learner phrases and then use them as much as possible. The prepositions, we talked about je, l is the same thing. A lot of times it's not going to be pronounced l, it's going to be pronounced o. So instead of saying le mall, the way it looks, it's going to sound like o. And for example, Nazar le mall is Nazar home. It's gonna sound like Nazar el Mala el mal Nazar el Mala. That's what it's gonna sound like. You have lots of greetings there. Learn when to use them in Kurdish. It's a little more complicated than in English. In Kurdish, you say Chawani Bashi, which literally means, how are you? Are you good? But we use it to mean hi. So when I put things in quotations like hi, that's the common everyday usage of it. And then the meaning, the more literal meaning comes after that. Now, one of the things you've probably heard a million times is bkhair. And that is when you get in a taxi, when you enter someone's house, when you enter their gate, when they talk to you and they find out that you're a foreigner and you've come to Kurdistan, bkhair. They're going to say that to welcome you. We don't really have welcome in English, but that's what it kind of means. And then it's bkhair. The ending is for one person. Sorry, my mouse isn't working when I do this. I don't know why. And bkhair, the ending for two people, two or more people. And then if someone says bkhair to you, you want to be polite and say to them khairan darbi. So try to learn those phrases so that you can be polite. Say khairan darbi. And learn that, have it automatically on the tip of your tongue so that you can say that to them. When you go to somebody's house and they say karamka, or if you're walking with someone and they say to you karamka, that means like go ahead, then your response to them needs to be karam darbi. And I don't really know what it means. It's not really like important to learn. It's just important to learn when to use it. So notice the difference here. Khair has that khair in it. So your answer is khairan darbi. But when the greeting is karamka, then your answer is karam darbi. So get those coordinated in your mind. Some common key phrases are like Khoresh darazi bit. In Zaho, it says bit at the end, not beat. The important thing here is the pronunciation of j. You don't say Khodejita, you say Khodeshta. And that's noted for you in the footnote. Sarchova is a very, very common way to say you're welcome. Sarchova. And a lot of times people will take two fingers and point to each eye as they say sarchova, because it literally means on eyes. And it's a very meaningful thing to Kurds to say sarchova, on eyes. It's not so meaningful to expats, but they use it all the time. And if you will use it back to them, oh, they'll just love it. So if someone says thank you for something, you can say sebchovo. And then the next one, Chode we behelit or Chode we behelit. This is if you talk to someone about their family members or you're talking to a child, after you finish talking with them, then if you're talking to the child, you would say Chodeta behelit. Or if you're talking about a boy or about a girl, you would say Chode we behelit or Chode wan behelit if it's for them. We'll get to those pronouns in the next lesson. Okay, so these are some very important things to learn in the beginning of your language learning. Okay, I'm going to stop the lesson at this time. We'll pick up on next week at section E and finish the lesson out next week. If any of you has any questions and you would like to ask them, you can open your mic at this time and ask the questions. Otherwise, the lesson is finished. Thank you for coming. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
I guess my curiosity is this a normal amount of, like, how many hours would you expect it for us to go back through this, like, per day to take? Is this typical that it's only once a week a lesson? If, like,
it will be yes, it will be because that's all I can manage.
Okay, but typically if you were here, would this lesson
be
there,
like, I would do it in person and we would have a 2-hour lesson or a 3-hour lesson at one time. If you look at your, that's the wrong one. If you look at your table of contents, it tells you how many classroom hours I would typically use. So I would typically teach lesson 1 in 3 classroom hours.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then would you normally, I'm just curious, like, for the amount of memorizing you're thinking of, is this like, would somebody normally do like 3 like 2 hours a day every other day or every day?
No. When I was teaching it in person, I taught 2 or 3 classroom hours once a week, and then people would go work with their language helpers and come back the next week for the next lesson.
Okay.
So it's just once a week. Yeah. So like your homework, do all that we've done, including memorizing, not just pronouncing, but memorizing all the vocabulary in section D. That'll keep you busy for a whole week.
That's a lot of memorizing. Okay.
A lot of memorizing. Yeah.
Can I
And
ask you, Cherie?
also just working through the stuff on the prereqs page, the transparent language stuff, getting your vocabulary cards printed out, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Ricky.
Pronunciation question. So I feel really stuck on the X and the Q, and I was with one of my language helpers, just spent 2 hours of them saying, no, not like this, like this. And of course, in my ears, he was saying the same thing twice when he said, not like this, but like this. Got any, like, getting unstuck from not hearing it or being able to pronounce it?
My best suggestion to you is you download that transparent language app and work with that over and over and over again. That's native speaker recorded, and it's very visual. They have games to work with all the pronunciation. It's all described on your page 1, your prereqs and recommendations. It's that number 1 thing there. You download that and then you work through the alphabet where this big arrow is. You work through your alphabet in Unit 1, Lesson 1. If you do that, you will have good success with your pronunciation and have a good start to your success with your pronunciation.
And one more pronunciation question. What we use the symbol E for, I just keep hearing different stuff. Like in some senses, it's like the E in Edward or 7, and other times I hear it like the A in cat, mat, bat. Am I hearing different dialects on that, or?
No, that letter is a chameleon. It's going to change its sound from time to time. So the spellings in the book are pretty standard spellings, and you're going to hear the vowels are the things that make dialects dialects. So, you're going to hear your language helper, and you're going to get used to the way they talk. And then their aunt is going to come visit, and she's going to talk to you, and you're going to be like, whoa, which village is she from? Because she talks differently than my language helper. And you're going to get a whole different little bit of dialect because the vowels are pronounced differently. So that's just one thing that you have to be really flexible with Kurdish language learning, because all those little villages that have been separated for centuries by a valley or by a forest or by a river, they develop their own little pronunciation. And then you get Shingali Kurds thrown into the mix, and they're speaking a different language. So, what I'm teaching you is the standard Zaho and Dahuk dialects. I'm not teaching you Shingali Kurdish. That's a whole different thing.
So just to clarify,
if you're working with Yazidis, that's not this.
To clarify on that, the sound made by the symbol E with no hat, like I am hearing it that different way, like the 7 Edward or Matt Cat. Are you saying more that it's the different dialects that I'm hearing, or that it's a chameleon inside the same dialect? Like I can hear the same person.
It's a chameleon inside the dialect. So usually it's going to be Sometimes it will be eh.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Isn't it different?
Yeah.
Good question.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks,
anybody else? Yeah,
and thank
anybody
you so
else?
much for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I want to know if Gunner's still listening. You didn't go to sleep on us, did you, Gunner?
Okay, I don't know why my mouse won't work, but it's not working. I wanted to say goodbye to you in person. You can see me up in the upper right-hand corner. There we are. Okay, so y'all have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness, so much. Wow. Praise the Lord. I'm hungry.
I guess so.
Hey, good job.
Oh, my butt's sore. I gotta go up on the couch.
So
That's really good.